see, this is my life. It always will be. There's nothing else. Just us. And the cameras. And those wonderful people out there in the dark.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Out There in the Dark. My name is Tom, and with me, as always, is Azed.
Oh, wait a minute. What? I don't get to say my own name anymore?
No, I changed
Wow, this is very toxic masculinity of you, Tom. It's like you ordering for me at a restaurant. And you didn't pronounce my name right anyway.
Oh, I didn't?
No. What did you say?
I called you AZ.
AZ. What? Such a white way of saying it. You have to say it. You have to say it like the way. You know what? I'm not even gonna No.
Yeah, don't patronize me.
It's okay. It's all right. Just call me AZ then. I guess.
It's all easier.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, good night. So, I guess we have an interesting show today. We've got some. It's an interesting show on many levels. I think because of the person that we're focusing on, who we just lost. Why am I being cagey? So yeah, it's David Lynch. David Lynch passed away. And for anybody who's into cinema, I think you understand this is a big loss for.
When I read it, I shouted. I was like, "Oh no!" In the middle of the office, and
I know. And you texted
it was a blow.
me. I think you texted.
I texted you right away.
Yeah. And I think you were the first to know. Actually, that you told me you were the first one who knew in my circle. Anyway,
well, I was at my desk, and then an alert popped up on my emails.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, what was it, from Variety?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
Shit. Yeah, so, we're going to get into, Lynch and what he, why this is such a big loss. We've lost other big filmmakers, and it's sad, and all that kind of stuff. But this is different, and I'll try to explain that once we get to talking a little bit more about him. But before we get into a more, somber, I guess, but respectful discussion about David Lynch, this was the week that they announced the Academy Award nominations.
They did.
Right. Tell us about that, Tom.
Yeah, I was happy because the company I work for, we got 6 nominations for our films, which is really exciting. We got 2 for The Apprentice, for Sebastian Stan playing Donald Trump.
Now, if he wins, do you think Trump will put him in jail, or?
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably before, because if he wins,
he'll accept it from jail.
Well, Sebastian Stan has done a lot of talking about Trump on his press tours for everything that he's been in.
Okay.
He was in another film this year called A Different Man, which was a really interesting film. But yeah, no, he'll go straight to Guantanamo, no question.
Right.
And then Jeremy Strong played Roy Cohn in the film, and he also got a supporting actor nomination. And he
was really good. He was really slimy,
scary,
yeah,
scary,
and sympathetic, which is hard to do for Roy Cohn.
Yeah, you actually feel sorry for him, which is crazy.
Yeah.
And then Memoir of a Snail got a Best Animated Film nomination. Right. It's a very dark, not for kids, animated movie. By the guy who made Mary and Max some years ago.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And then, but I was really excited because a Brazilian film called I'm Still Here, which we're opening next week, got a Best Picture nomination, as well as Best International Feature and Best Actress.
Right.
For Fernanda Torres. And it is an excellent film. I don't usually try to plug our films on this podcast, but...
Well, you haven't really said where you work, so... No.
But go watch the movies.
You're actually a CSIS agent, though, aren't you?
Yeah. Sometimes.
This whole distributing
on
thing.
Hiatus.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's good news, and congrats to you guys. And
we'll do our Oscar episode at some point.
Yeah.
Probably.
Maybe that'll be our first video episode.
Oh, that would be great.
Yeah. So everyone can see how completely heroin smacked I am.
Yeah.
When
it's
I do
not
it.
Pretty, guys.
I really start with the crack. On the red carpet show, and then move into the heroin.
Yeah.
Right after the
Jack
first
Daniel's Chaser.
Exactly. Interestingly, I haven't seen any nominated films.
I've missed a lot. I'm way behind.
That's because a lot of them are terrible. My feeling is a lot of them are terrible. I have not seen Anora. I don't know if it's. I think it's supposed to be pretty good.
It's really good.
Okay.
I really liked it. Yeah.
That one I'm eager to see. The Brutalist, of course, I'm gonna go see it this week. I think.
Yeah.
I'll go to a matinee and see it, even though it's a 3-hour movie, whatever. But
well, I want to see it in 70 millimeter. It's in 70 millimeter on some shows at the Lightbox. So.
Yeah. Oh, I just renewed my membership, so
Hey,
we can
go.
both go. Yeah, but I haven't seen. I mean, The Brutalist. I hadn't even heard of it until like a couple of months ago, right? So it's a weird year because it was different from last year because I'd seen everything last year.
Like I've seen Conclave. Conclave is fine.
Haven't
it's
seen
good,
that one.
but it's nothing to go crazy about.
Right.
I wasn't big on The Substance, which was a surprise nomination given it's a horror film.
I've heard that one's really good. Like I heard that's like
people love it, but
Yeah.
it's just me. Like just me, I guess. I don't know.
I guess you just don't like women. Is that it?
No, is it?
Sounds like sounds like a married man. Anyway,
oh boy, not married.
You've been
what
married
else?
more than all of us put together. With all your craziness.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, we'll see what happens. I'm
Then
going to watch
Wicked.
some.
I mean, are we going to go see Wicked? I don't think so.
I'm not going to see
No.
Wicked. Like,
No,
I have a sorry, I have a limit. Like, my balls actually do start to feel a bit weird when I start to say I'm going to go see Wicked. They almost start to I can feel them shrinking a little bit.
What about Dune Part 2?
Big balls on that one.
Yeah.
Big fucking balls.
big
Big
worm
dick
balls.
energy on that one.
Big worm balls.
Worm balls. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sandworms.
That can I guess they can reproduce. Like they can
They
if they
must.
got cut off, they could just regenerate, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have that power too. That's why I'm not afraid of castration.
I don't remember what else. What else is nominated? I have no idea. But anyway.
Yeah, I didn't find it that exciting this year, to be honest. I was just sort of like, whatever, Oscars,
Yeah.
Too much other shit going on in the world right now.
Yeah, there's a lot of other things to worry about.
Well, this is the thing. Like, so I guess I'm going to talk a little bit about my response to Lynch, and then I'll pass it to you. How's that?
Please. Yeah.
Okay, so, well, anybody who knows me knows that I'm more than just like a stan, like I'm not just like a fan of David Lynch. I find that David Lynch, this is going to sound a little weird, but he is a bit of a model for me in many ways, right? He's, as a filmmaker, obviously one of the best. I mean, I just think that there's nobody that touches him, right? In the modern era, anyway. But as a human being, also, I just loved his personality. The fact that you could see something like Eraserhead or Blue Velvet, and then say, okay, I wonder who the guy is who directed these, and then you see him, and he's just like so kind and delightful and wacky and hilarious, and yet, for as wacky and hilarious as he is, you take him completely seriously because he's a serious person, right? Mm-hmm. Not in the way where you act serious, but he's serious about
he's earnest. And
he's earnest. He's earnest about peace and harmony and love and connection and self-connection and all this stuff that, a lot of gurus out there will, sort of exploit. He never did that, and that's why he seems so genuine. So I've read all the books. I've read, I've seen all the documentaries, all that stuff, right? I've just really followed his career. Not like some people. I have a friend, my friend Joel, who's an amazing guy, but I almost thought about making a short film about him called The Man Who Loved Lynch, because he this is as soon as I heard about Lynch passing from you, actually, I thought of Joel immediately, because he's the guy that we all know that he's the Lynch guy, right? So there are people even more, connected, because he also, people who do TM or anything like that, right? He was equally as involved in that kind of stuff, right? So this was a big loss for me, and it's different. It's not like I was saying to you earlier. It's not like I feel sad. I mean, obviously I'm sad that he's dead, right? But he was so spiritual that I understand that he probably was okay with passing. You know what I mean? Because I think he understood passing in a way that was, he had made some kind of reconciliation with the idea of the other side, right? And you see that in his work.
My worry was that it was a little traumatizing because you may know, like, because of his emphysema, he couldn't really leave the house. He couldn't do much. And his passing was hastened by the LA fires.
It was, yeah.
Where he was evacuated, and he died at his daughter Jennifer Lynch's home. And, I mean, that kind of breaks my heart.
It does. Because he probably could have lived a lot longer if if that hadn't happened. I have a feeling we talked about this too. No news has come out, but those fires might have just made the oxygen levels much lower, right? Because fire consumes
absolutely.
So much oxygen.
I mean, smoke would have gotten into his lungs on his way out of the house,
and that's it. That's it, right? But okay, like I know he's gone, and we'll never have anything new from him, and that's sad because even as a relatively elderly person, he made probably one of his greatest works, which was the third season of Twin Peaks, right? I think I can clearly say that Twin Peaks 3, season 3, is the pinnacle of television art, if you want to call it that, right? I mean, television's not known for being art, but it can be, right? And I think that's what he really proved. I mean, this is an 18-hour movie, right? And there are indelible images. Now, this is the thing about Lynch. His movies are indelible. If you've seen a Lynch movie, you know what it looks like. Even if you're not a big fan, you understand, much in the same way that you understand what Kafkaesque means. You understand what Lynchian means, right? He's just one of those. He's one of those artists that has really permeated the culture without necessarily being a blockbuster hit kind of guy, right? He's not like a Marvel movies guy, but he's influenced the culture in a deep way, right?
Yeah, but the first season of Twin Peaks, the ratings were unbelievable.
Yeah,
I don't know. Like I read a stat that the first episode of the first season was watched by 1/3 of the viewing audience that night.
Wow.
That's insane.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there was a kind of a phenomenon that happened.
Huge phenomenon. Yeah. There was a rumor that Queen Elizabeth canceled a meeting with Paul McCartney to watch Twin Peaks.
Oh my God. I wish that was true. That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I remember when it came out and it was a big deal. But yeah, what happened was then the second season, right? And like it's a whole thing. Like there's a whole bunch of reasons why, but like Lynch was already working on Wild at Heart at that point, so he was less involved. Right. So they had a lot more directors for hire. But on top of that, Mark Frost, who was his partner on Twin Peaks, was more of a TV guy because he came from like Hill Street Blues or something. I think
so,
yeah. So he was more of the TV guy, and I think that's what kind of the balance was perfect in the first season because you have the Mark Frost keeping things kind of like more narrative and a little more straightforward, and then you have Lynch throwing his Lynchian craziness in there, right?
Yeah, it was a great partnership, and Lynch has said that Frost was responsible for at least 50% of Twin Peaks,
right,
and its strengths.
Yeah, I can see that, but you can really understand second season when Lynch is not as involved, it becomes such a I think people hate on season 2 a little too much.
Okay.
Because the second time I watched season 2 all the way through, I enjoyed it more all the way through. There were some absolute duds, but I think only 2 or 3 that were really, really bad, right? Without the Lynch touch, it kind of just became like a standard, pretty good detective story, right? So yeah, that was why the second season died. Also, there were other reasons, I think, to do with the war, right? Like the Gulf War was on at that time, I think. Oh no, Iraq. I remember reading some article that said that once the war started, they got preempted like 10
okay.
times in a row or something. So it was like
Oh no.
for coverage, and then they
Yeah,
moved them
that's
to moved them to
stuff.
Saturday night because I'm more. This is always what happens, and if you're in the business, you know that this always happens. Is that, new guys come, like people come and go in television all the time, so
It's more tenuous.
it's more tenuous, and the people who okayed your project may not be there tomorrow, right? And that's what happened with Twin Peaks, and
That's what happened with Mulholland Drive, because Mulholland Drive was supposed to be a TV show.
yes, yeah,
And so he shot the pilot with Naomi Watts and everything else, and then the network just hated it. And Lynch said in an interview that he found out that it was watched by the executive while he was standing up in his office at 6 o'clock in the morning.
yeah.
So that's what he was fighting against.
Yeah, and I think but I think that that's true, all that stuff, because I think what happened was there was it's amazing how unpolitical somebody like Lynch was himself as a figure. I never heard him talk much about politics, right? But his kind of movie was okay. So this is the interesting thing about the phenomenon of Lynch for me. He's that guy, and he's rare. That's a rare person, right? Who can actually be making extremely avant-garde, surrealist work for a mainstream audience, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that is unheard of, right? And it's his particular way of, and this is his genius, I think, is that he either intuitively or whatever, I don't know, but he knows how to use the right hooks to get anybody involved, and what he really reveals a lot, and I think you can speak to this too, is that when you watch something like a TV show or whatever, there's a preset kind of set of codes for whatever you're watching, a comedy, a sitcom, a movie, a rom-com, whatever genre you're in. They have rules, right? Like it's like particular things will follow particular ways. By the third act, you have to have done this. By the second act, this has to have happened, right?
Yeah.
And depending on who you are, you'll follow that kind of thing, that template, more or less, either right to the letter, or you'll screw with it, right? What Lynch does is he kind of extrapolates those tropes, those kind of almost archetypal, universal storytelling lures, murder mystery, young detectives searching for the answer,
Even like a body horror, or like in The Elephant Man, a very prestige, classy drama.
Well, that's a whole different, that's a whole.
Or The Straight Story.
Yeah, he does sometimes come out of that. I mean, Elephant Man, I think, is more in his wheelhouse.
Yeah.
Straight Story was definitely, which was something I think he wasn't going to direct at first. With Straight Story, it was his, who was it? Mary Sweeney? He has this cast of people, in his crew and stuff that he's been, with since the beginning. But basically, there was a story that was true, that one of his co-workers was going to direct and write, and then they asked him to executive produce, and when he read it, he said, "I think I want to do this." So, yeah,
Interesting.
that he was that guy. He was that guy who could bridge those two worlds, because back in the day, when you had if you had somebody like Jodorowsky, right, El Topo, he would never play on TV.
Or
never.
Contemporary like Greg Araki, who's a fine filmmaker and also very avant-garde. But yeah, I think Lynch had a really great command of narrative and storytelling as a framework for his avant-garde style. So if you watch a movie like Mulholland Drive, which operates on almost like a complete dream logic, the logic is there and the structure is there. And it's never confusing, and to me anyway, it's never confusing. It's never like, oh my God, this is so wild.
It's never frustrating. Yeah,
it's never frustrating. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas you can see like other avant-garde cinema, like I can definitely understand somebody saying they don't like Antonioni movies, for
Yeah.
example, because they're slow as fuck, right? So, I mean, I like them because I'm crazy, right? But not all of them, but yeah, I can definitely understand people not liking Bergman or Fellini, because they're hard to understand. But he uses symbolism, Lynch. He uses symbolism in a way where it doesn't matter whether you get it or not, and that is really a kind of magician's trick, right? Mm-hmm. That he's tapped into something so universal in all human beings. I'm not saying all, but enough human beings that he made an amazing career out of his art, right? That he touched so many people that way, and it was because he was able to do that balance. And it's amazing to me because I'm rereading his book, right? His biography called Room to Dream, which is again very Lynchian the way he does it, because it's like, first chapter is written by an author who's the biographer, and then there's a response to the chapter by Lynch, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a beautiful book and really fun to read. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I'll tell you a little bit about what's interesting about Lynch and his background. He grew up in like Montana, right? Missoula, Montana, and his parents were, I think his dad was a chemist or something. I can't remember what his parents did. It doesn't matter. But they had a good marriage. And I heard this quote from him. And he said, anything that we wanted to do was okay with them. They would, help them pursue the kids in the family. They were the kind of parents that would help them pursue whatever they were interested in. Right.
That's great.
Yeah. Not like try to like change the kid, which is, like
not a doctor or a lawyer.
Exactly. Yeah. So, had this kind of idyllic Americana kind of, a country upbringing, hence the kind of Jimmy Stewartish quality to him. Right. But, when he got to art school, he had to move to Philadelphia, and it was, everything about his work is very Philadelphia, right? Because it was such a poor part of town, and so all the industry had gone away. So there was these abandoned, industries and this kind of like ghost land, ghost town looking thing, but with these huge, concrete slabs, and
so very much like
it's
his
very
first
much
film.
like it's very much like his first film, Eraserhead. And he started out being a painter and had never even thought about movies when he was, and it was only when he got a grant apparently in school when he was at in Philadelphia Art Technical College or whatever, to make a moving. He had the idea to make a moving painting, basically.
Right.
And then he started doing animations, and those animations are amazing.
They are.
Yeah,
they are. They're on the extras on Eraserhead.
Yeah, they're on the Criterion channel too. A lot of them. One's called Six Men Getting Sick or something.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
The grandmother.
And the grandmother, and there's a couple of others. And then he got an AF, and he was being supported, by people back then at the AFI, right? See, this is the thing. It's why people go.
Yeah, it's facilities. He could live there practically, and
basically, the people could sense something in this guy, and they gave him the money to make Eraserhead, and Eraserhead took 5 years to film, right? And if anybody gets the chance, maybe we should put the link up on our Facebook page. I will, out there in the dark /Facebook. I don't know what the is. I'll figure it out. But if you can see the documentary about the making of Eraserhead and how they basically took over this, old, abandoned,
like a barn or something,
it was owned by the AFI, but it was like a compound of some kind, and they all lived there. Like they all kind of basically lived there,
and they all did everything.
And he was working with all those guys that he worked with for the rest of his life. Jack Fisk and Sissy Spacek was there, and Mary Sweeney and Mary Fisk and Jack Nance and all those guys. Like what you get with Lynch is that he was really creating a kind of like a group, a kind of a family, and but it wasn't like culty and gross, because it was like, it turned out
It was genuine.
It was real.
It was real
right?
community that he loved to be, like Al McLaughlin he kept working with.
Yeah, and he's touched everybody. Like, you talk to when you watch any interviews with actors or whatever, he really had a major impact on a lot of actors' lives that he worked with, because he was unique in the way that he did things. He was not a Hollywood industry filmmaker. He was an artist who was able to make it in Hollywood, right?
Yeah, very unique. Apparently, with actors, he wouldn't audition them in the usual way. He wouldn't ask them to read lines from a scene. He just would meet them, and then he would decide if he wanted them or not. I mean,
yeah, he would sort of meet, usually at Bob's Big Boy, where he went every day. Every day for like, what, 20 years?
Burgers and cigarettes, that guy.
Yeah, burgers, cigarettes, coffee, pie.
Yeah.
But, he was, he wouldn't audition. He would just basically talk to you, and he could get a sense. He was a very intuitive artist, right? And one of the stories about him that I loved is that when he was a kid, he said he had a friend whose father was a painter. And he said, as a kid, he thought to himself, I didn't know you could do that. You can be a painter, right? And, the idea that you could devote your life to art, regardless of whether you make a lot of money or whatever, the fact that that was even an option had never occurred to him. And as soon as he heard it, he said, that's what I want to do.
Wow.
That's
amazing.
And then he basically retained all of the elements that I understand go into creative work, right? He retained the sense of play, right? And the sense of curiosity that you need to have in order to create, right? Because he would often talk about, in order to get to a place where you can, as he called it, catch the big fish, right? You have to basically meditate, right? Or some form of deep dive into the self. And so that's when people would say, well, how do you, you're such a nice guy, how do you come up with all this weird, creepy stuff, right? It's like he's able to go deep enough into his own psyche, to kind of see where the darkness is, right? And so he never is saying that you can be without darkness, right? You have it, but you
have to coexist,
and you have to. Most people just repress it,
right?
Pretend it's not there, or say you're bad, like they'll project it, right? All those things, those Freudian projections and coping schemes. But he was not. He was like a psychoanalyst this way, where he would basically say you have to go deep down in there. It's like in the ancient myth of going to Hades, right? If you could enter Hades and then return, right? That was the whole thing, is to come back to give the information. So he was like that. And that's the artist. The real artist has to do that, has to be able to go into hell and then come back, right?
I had read that when he was writing Blue Velvet, he was stuck. He didn't have an ending, and it was driving him crazy. And that he only came up with an ending because he was meditating. And while he was meditating, an image came into his mind, and it was a man in a yellow jacket with a police radio in his pocket.
Oh, like the guy standing at the end.
And that's all it took. And then once he thought of that image, everything else fell into place.
Yeah. And it's funny, it's funny. I've heard this with other famous people, not even artists, like Nicholas Tesla. He apparently, while walking by a brook, he had this vision of the DC current, like how the flow of it, right? So it was an intuition that he got through just unconscious, whatever, just a kind of aha. And I think that's similar, right? And this is why I think like the seeds of creativity can never be something that you force, right? You can't force something to be good.
No, I think great artists and great artist communities come up from just being together and allowing the space to exist to come up with these things. I mean, when I think about people who are writing and they're sitting at their desk with a computer, it boggles my mind. I mean, I don't know how you need that relaxation, that breathing room.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I think you do have to sit at a computer by yourself, but I think what somebody like Lynch, what I really loved about him and why I followed him as an artist, not just his movies, but we'll get to his movies in a second, is he precisely said you're never really alone, right, with yourself. Like you are equally, and this is kind of true for people who are okay being on their own, you know. I think they've come to understand that you as an individual are as vast and interesting as anything out there. You know, the internal is much more vast, is like oceanic, right, compared to what you perceive from the outside world. So, you know, there's this whole realm of ourselves that we deny as a culture, and there's reasons for that, like, you know, capitalism and shit and exploitation of workers. And nobody, if we lived in a different kind of society where people were allowed to actually get to know who they are
instead of just doing things for other people.
Exactly. Instead of having to survive, like you work 40, 50, 60 hours a week in order to put food on the table or get status or whatever the fuck, right? If you were able to, if we lived in a society where you were born into a world where none of that mattered, right? You were taking care of your food, your shelter, your clothes, whatever. Everything's taken care of. Now what are you going to do? I think most people would fucking go insane at this point, you know, because we don't know what that looks like, right? But he did. He lived that way. He actually lived the life he said he was going to live, and he did it. And that's extremely admirable, right? That somebody can actually think it. I'm going to live this extremely difficult life to live, but because he, you know, people say this all the time. Well, I don't care if I'm successful or not. I just enjoy doing it. Okay, people say that,
but you got to eat. You
yeah,
gotta pay the rent.
but also it's like people will easily sell. Like, I mean, I have never met anybody and I work in film and television all my life. I've never met anybody who I even thought twice about taking some commercial money for some gig because it paid a lot.
Sure,
you know. Whereas I just read something that Lynch turned down like $5 million when he was still just after The Elephant Man to do some action movie. I can't remember what it was now.
Return of the Jedi.
It might have been. Yeah.
I think at
he was
the
asked
time George Lucas was asking like everybody, like David Cronenberg turned down Return of the Jedi.
Yeah. So these guys, and he's similar, right? Cronenberg, he's similar. He's similar, like not in the personality of him, but a similar artist.
The integrity.
Yeah, the integrity of the artist, exactly. So I don't know. What do you want to do? Do you want to just sort of talk about some of his movies? I know I'm much more into him than you.
Yeah, so I'll just talk a little bit about my relationship with David Lynch as a film buff, because I've always liked his films, and every time he had a film coming out, it was like an event. But there's a lot of films where I was sort of like iffy on or liked and was, you know, like I remember, for example, I remember seeing Blue Velvet way back when it came out. I think I watched it on home video, and it was okay. I wasn't crazy about it. I think, and when I look back, I think I felt its whole, you know, the underbelly of small town America. Like I had also recently seen Shadow of a Doubt,
which it's very much influenced by.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, David Lynch is nothing on Hitchcock.
Oh, I see. Right.
Yeah. So I was just like, well, it's not as good as that.
Right.
But it was stupid. That's how you think when you're like 20, right?
Right.
I wasn't even 20. I was probably 15. And
really, yeah.
And so last weekend, I rewatched Blue Velvet, and I was dumbfounded.
Yeah.
What an incredible film. And
brilliant film.
You know, and then another example, I always liked Mulholland Drive. I thought that was a good film. I rewatched it this weekend. Flat out masterpiece.
Super masterpiece.
I mean, I could not believe the complexity of that film, and yet so clear, and like I was amazed. And you know, I hadn't even watched Twin Peaks at all when it was on. looking back, I've often wondered, well, why? You know, like AZ would, you know, and his brother would yell at me for being an idiot for never watching it. And when I think back,
Did we do that really?
Yeah,
We did.
yeah, you did.
Oh,
You
that's
did.
good.
But
I've never been more proud of myself.
But folks, it was on opposite Cheers, and there was no way I was going to give up Cheers.
I even told you before we started you shouldn't admit this out
I
loud.
have to admit it. I have to purge. Look,
Okay,
what would David Lynch say? He would say, "Yes, admit it, Tom."
Exactly.
Yeah,
You'd say, that's
so-
super duper, Tom.
Yeah, he'd say, "Oh, golly gee, that's a wow." So, so I've started watching Twin Peaks for the first time, and again, I'm blown away. It's such an incredible show.
Yeah.
For,
So that's
for a network.
it's interesting to sit with somebody like who's just getting now more into him.
More
right?
into it, you know. And I was really impressed by Eraserhead when I saw it in my early 20s. I rewatched it a couple of years ago, and I was completely like
Yeah.
dumbstruck. I mean, it's such a unsettling.
And you know, I see if you agree. Like I don't know. Like I know you can see his influence, right, in popular culture and stuff like that. But there is nothing like his movies. Like
No.
like even somebody who tries to be Lynchian, you know, and like for example, you know, everybody tried to copy the Twin Peaks sort of aura and the atmosphere after
Yeah.
that. There was like 50 shows like that, right? But you can't because he's in it. It's like Lynch puts himself so much in the
Yeah.
work, like the way artists do, right? That you can't replicate it, you know?
Well, I recently I watched for the first time the first season of True Detective, which I thought was excellent. But you can see Twin Peaks in there. You can totally
Definitely.
see how it like riffs off of certain tropes, but is its own thing and isn't nearly as, of course, radical.
Yeah, it's that
Falls back in the same way that Twin Peaks does to like.
absolutely, like there's so many, but I think
Yeah.
it's because he had a philosophy and a vision. And it's funny because so you like the first movie I saw by him was Elephant Man.
Probably me too.
Right. And that one it's creepy in its own way because it's got creepy parts and that are very Lynchian, but it's beautiful, right? And it's also very sad and very affecting and
It's very emotional. It's
Yeah.
it's a lovely film.
yeah, it is a great film. It's a beautiful film. And you know, and then the second film I saw by him was Blue Velvet.
Yeah, me too, I think. Yeah.
And when I saw it, I was maybe like 18 or 19, so I was a bit older. But I was just like, I have no idea what's going on in this movie. What's going on? Why is he doing that, right? But you know, here's the thing. It's like it doesn't matter. That was the revelation to me very early on with Lynch. It really didn't matter to me whether I understood the film or not. Even after I left the movie, you know, or even days later or years later, if I couldn't put together the meaning in quotes of the film, that was completely fine. You could still, the enjoyment didn't come from you breaking it down. It's one of the rare kinds of films. I think Tarkovsky's got this a little bit, maybe a couple, like Bresson, maybe a couple of others, where you don't have to necessarily encapsulate the entire experience in one viewing, right?
When I was rewatching Mulholland Drive last weekend, I was thinking a lot about Tarkovsky's Mirror.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Thinking a lot about that while I was watching it. And, of course, Blue Velvet is such a excellent film noir.
Perfect
And
film
so
noir, yeah.
That brought me to that. Now, interestingly, I had started watching Twin Peaks for the first time before that. And so now watching Blue Velvet, which came just before,
Yeah,
he made Blue Velvet, then Dune, and then Dune was a colossal failure. So then he made Twin Peaks.
I like Dune. I like David Lynch's Dune better than the new one.
Well, you stand alone, I think.
Yeah, me and maybe one or two other people.
But Blue Velvet is an incredible like precursor to Twin Peaks. There's so many similarities.
A lot of his movies have a very similar through line,
But Twin Peaks takes it to a whole different level.
It does, because it also it sort of pierces that whole Americana, prom queen, high school, the whole thing. And this is the thing about there's a very famous shot at the beginning of Blue Velvet. You know, series of shots that are very much like Shadow of a Doubt, the opening of Shadow of a Doubt,
Right.
where you see the actual, the fire truck with the waving firemen, right, coming down the street, and the picket fence, and
there's a Dalmatian on the fire truck.
A Dalmatian, exactly, and it's just this idyllic small town Americana, and then you see the father watering the lawn, and then you see the camera goes down into the ground, under the grass, keeps going under deeper until it gets to just teeming, like an area underneath that teeming with bugs, right?
Yeah.
With beetles and stuff. It's just like.
And the father has a heart attack.
After that, yeah,
before that.
Oh yeah, just before that. That's right. Just when the water, exactly.
Yeah.
It's
so
very
visceral.
But it's very much like when he's going to show you the underbelly. He's going to show you like he's not going to like make it like, oh, there's some crazy serial killer in town. He's going to now look at the pervasiveness of evil that's undergirds everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that and that's why people at the time were always like, oh, well, the Kyle MacLachlan and Laura Dern, they're silly, they're kind of corny, right? Because they're kind of being like so earnest and whatever,
little Hardy Boys.
Yeah, but it was like he got really upset about that. He said, I mean it. I don't mean it to be ironic at all. Mm-hmm. And he didn't, because his idea was innocence, good, purity, all that stuff has that kind of. That's why we make fun of it, right? Because it's something that we find square or whatever. And then so when he shows you good, he shows you good. When he shows you evil, he shows you evil. But they're never separated.
No, they're always
by a binary sort of black and white, right?
Which, as you explained earlier, was part of Lynch's, motifs, was the coexistence of good and evil.
Yeah.
And at the end of Blue Velvet, they're looking like pastorally outside the kitchen window, where there's a robin, which represents in Laura Dern's dream this sort of happiness and this goodness in the world.
The robin's come home, yeah.
And it's eating a bug.
Yeah, it's eating one of those bugs, yeah.
Which
means it's killing the evil, but it's also a kind of a scary image, right?
Because, there's more bugs down there.
There's lots more bugs.
At the end of Blue Velvet, they're looking out the kitchen window, and they can see this robin, and the robin represents the dream that Laura Dern had about happiness taking over and all this love in the air.
Right.
But the robin is eating a bug.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah,
which is like kind of symbolic of, the good, conquering the evil, but at the same time it's a disturbing image, right?
Yeah.
Because
plus we know there's a lot more bugs.
A lot more bugs under there.
Surface.
Yeah, you got to keep vigilant. But I think what's most interesting about Blue Velvet in that regard is that the Jeffrey character, played by Kyle MacLachlan, who basically stood as an avatar for Lynch, he's sort of this guy who's come back to his hometown, and he gets embroiled in this whole, mystery about, the Isabella Rossellini character. And what happens to him is he kind of starts to become, he himself starts to become a little bit like the Frank character.
There's this dark side to him that he didn't know existed.
Yeah, and that's it, right? That's the whole thing with Lynch, is there's this kind of, like idea that evil is something out there that can get you, right? Mm-hmm. It can kind of suck you in.
Yeah,
right?
and I think that's reflected in MacLachlan's character in Twin Peaks as well, as he's investigating the death of Laura Palmer. He keeps having these visions, and he keeps going to these dark places. And when he explains them to, like, Harry Truman and the other cops, they're like, okay, let's do that.
Yeah.
They totally accept that, you had this crazy dream about this, dwarf talking backwards in the Red Room. Okay.
Yeah, or the giant.
Or the giant.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's it. I mean, like, there's a kind of one of the things I realized about cinema, that generally speaking, is that the best cinema, for me anyway, the best films for narrative, I mean, are ones that kind of acknowledge that there's a kind of magic in the world, right? And by saying that, it doesn't necessarily imply anything, kind of supernatural or religious. It indicates something. Again, I come back to the psychoanalytic read all the time with Lynch, and I think a lot of theorists do this because he is kind of the guy who is exploring the self, right? He's exploring the depths of good and evil within the same entity, right? And how that it's not like good and evil are kind of binary opposites. They sort of coast in parallel.
Yeah.
You know,
They weave together.
the way your dreaming self and your conscious self kind of are constantly there. It's not like it's not like your dreaming self is not there.
And I think the ultimate I think his ultimate expression of that is in the Betty/Diane character in Mulholland Drive.
Yes.
Where, as a viewer, one, you're not quite sure who's real and who's not.
Right.
But also, two, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day.
I mean, yeah.
Lynch always fought against anybody trying to get him to explain his own films. He would never give an explanation.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, he said that, like, I read a quote from him where he said that Eraserhead is probably one of the most written about movies of his, he said. And he said he's never yet once read any critique or review that accorded with what he thought the movie was about.
Right.
Right. So, it's believable, right? Because, I mean, for these things are so personal. And this is one of the things about, like, anybody trying to be a filmmaker or write or do art. What Lynch really teaches with his work, and it's in his work. It's not just something he says, right? It's in his work, and that's why I think they're difficult for some people. Is in order to be authentic, as an artist, you can't be at all worried or concerned about whether people are going to understand it, and yet. I can tell you, just like myself, whenever I'm doing anything creative, I do worry about that. That's a very difficult thing to get past, right? And I think most people in the industry, that's all they think about.
Yeah.
And so you're basically trying to guess or speculate on how people generally are going to respond, and it's just such a top down, surface level kind of set of metrics that you're using.
Yeah, I mean, you and I work in the film industry in Canada, where it's always frustrating to me when I see projects in development, and everybody has notes. Everybody is going to tell you what to change.
Yeah.
And, because your funding is coming from different directions.
Yeah, it's basically a status and power game.
And then you're getting notes from different people that say different things. And what do you do?
Yeah, exactly. And, and the thing is, like, Lynch was always he was such his own person, right? And he was able to kind of like, he had kind of a dream career for any artist. You think, here's a guy who spent, 5 years making his first movie. It totally flopped when it first came out, but then it built over years.
All those midnight shows.
Yeah, in New York and LA, it's when those midnight screenings started happening, and that's how it got really popular.
I saw it on a midnight screening for the first time.
Oh, at like the Roxy here in Toronto?
I saw it at the Euclid.
Oh, at the Euclid.
Remember the Euclid?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, wow. I've shown movies at the Euclid.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I guess, the whole point is that he was, I can't even think of another filmmaker who had that particular kind of niche of being totally working as if they were like Michael Snow, or some other like, really, really experimental filmmaker, and was still able to kind of break through into the mainstream again. That's sort of the beauty of this person, and that's why it's so sad to lose somebody like that, because I
nobody like that anymore.
Yeah, it's like luck sort of struck in this one person, or if you call it luck, but talent plus experience plus fortitude.
I mean, he never. I guess he had to compromise in some television. Because he had other TV projects that didn't go anywhere.
They didn't go anywhere, but that's different from, like, let's just make a sitcom.
But maybe Twin Peaks season 2 wasn't exactly how he wanted it. And of course, Mulholland Drive was supposed to be a TV show, although the movie is near perfect.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like
that wasn't what he envisioned at first.
Yeah, he basically, and it's funny because right after Twin Peaks season 2, and you'll see this now that you're almost done, but he does the last episode, and he does, I think, one just before that too. Okay. But the last episode of season 2 is one of the best episodes. I think it's the best episode of Twin Peaks altogether.
Okay.
And that's because he's back, right?
Right.
And then right after that, he makes Fire Walk with Me, which is like the prequel.
Yeah.
And there's no Mark Frost in there at all.
Yeah.
Like it's like him saying, okay, now I'm going to take control of this project the way it's supposed to be. Right. I'm sure that's not what he actually said, but that's sort of the behavior. It's like he took the Twin Peaks season 2 and kind of made Fire Walk with Me and sort of said, this is how you're supposed to watch this show.
Okay.
This is what it's about. Because Fire Walk with Me is, again, one of those movies that when I saw it, I hated it.
Everybody hated it.
Yeah. Yeah. I hated it because it was like, I like Twin Peaks, right? And I wanted it to be like that. And it wasn't. It was more like Inland Empire, right? It's just very, it's, whatever. But of course, now I feel exactly the opposite.
Right. Yeah, I can't wait to see it.
Yeah, I've heard some people say that it's one of the few David Lynch movies that you tear up at.
Wow.
But I actually find that I teared up a little bit at Mulholland Drive watching it last night too, like in that Club Silencio part.
Yeah.
Just and also the part right afterwards when you find out, that Diane is really Betty, and she's in her apartment alone, and there's that masturbation scene and that whole thing. It's just so painful, Oh,
man.
He really knows how to capture that kind of like despair, right? I've been, Tina's been saying to me all week, she's like, oh, wow, you're really in mourning on this guy. I said, yeah, I just have to have Lynch around right now,
right.
And watching his movies after he passed became almost like a bit of a comforting thing, which is odd to say about Lynch movies because they're usually not very comforting, right? But it felt comforting to me because I've gotten so into his ethos that I see the beauty in something like Eraserhead, which most people think of as just a very like creepy and scary film, and especially like that whole like lady in the radiator part, right? People are really scared of her, which I understand, but she's actually like a figure of liberation, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And there's that man in the moon or whatever it is.
And it's a neat little trope that he does in a few of his films where mid-film there's this little musical bit that comes out of nowhere.
Yeah.
That, so in Blue Velvet you've got Dean Stockwell singing Roy Orbison, and then in Mulholland Drive you've got
Silencio. You've got
Rebecca
Del Rio,
singing Crying. And it always means different things.
Yeah, but it's a lot of the times it's Roy Orbison, and the thing about Roy Orbison is he was known as the sort of the guy who sang about lonely people, lonely men, lonely people, right? And
very forlorn.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing about Lynch. His movies are really about people who are very lonely and acting out of loneliness. Because even Laura Palmer, her whole trajectory is that she wants to be popular, right? Mm-hmm. She wants to get into this exciting life and, kind of, break out of the picket fence existence she has, but it leads to her death, right?
Exactly.
Because, it's like when you go to the dark side, it's like his point is like, when you go to the dark side, it's, it's not just fun and games. There's something, you're dabbling with something deep there, right? So I watched this week. I'll tell you the ones I rewatched are Eraserhead, Lost Highway, which I hadn't seen for a long time, and I really enjoyed watching it.
I haven't seen that one for a long time. Maybe we should want to talk about that one a bit.
Lost Highway. So Lost Highway comes after after Blue Velvet, and after
I think after Twin Peaks, right?
Yeah, after, I believe it's Wild at Heart after Twin Peaks. So it's after Wild at Heart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is, yeah.
Okay, so what to say about that one? I remember when I watched it the first time, even seemed to be a departure for him, right? This is a movie where you have Bill Pullman and Patricia Arquette. They're a married couple. He's like this jazz musician, right? A saxophone player, but he does this very crazy, like, outside jazz stuff. Anyway, they have this marriage that's very odd. They sort of like skirt around each other in this house, and the way he shoots it is like they're kind of like in and out of spaces all the time, right? But they're not really connecting. And then one day there's a videotape comes to the door. It's very much like Cachet.
Okay.
A videotape comes to the door, and they put it in. It's their house from outside. Somebody's videotaping their house, right? And then they get another one, and it's like inside the house now, right? And anyway, more stuff happens. Scary Robert Blake comes into it.
That's the thing I remember the most, yeah.
They're at a party, and Robert Blake, in this kind of weird kabuki makeup, comes up to Bill Pullman and says, "I'm in your house," and he says, "Okay, whatever, guy," like, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "No, I am. You can call your house right now and find out." So he calls, and then he says, the guy on the other line says, "See, I told you I'm in your house," and he's standing right there too.
Yeah.
So crazy shit is happening. Eventually, what happens is, apparently, Bill Pullman murders his wife, Patricia Arquette, goes to jail, doesn't seem to understand what's going on. But then, about halfway during the movie, he's in jail, in a jail cell, and then this transition thing happens where he suddenly turns into Balthazar Getty.
Okay.
Right? And the Bill Pullman character is gone out of the jail cell. Like the cops come in the next day, and they're like, where did he go? So, and now you don't even hear about Bill Pullman after that for like an hour, right? Or like half an hour. Like,
wow.
Suddenly it's Balthazar Getty. Robert Loggia plays this gangster, and he's Balthazar Getty is this mechanic, and he keeps bringing his car in, and they know each other. And one day he comes in with Patricia Arquette, who is in both parts. Well, it's not sure whether she's the same person, because she's blonde now, and she's more like a gangster's moll, right? But it's like, is she the same woman or not, right?
So a bit of Mulholland Drive.
Definitely
happening.
Even that thing where it's like, and then eventually it becomes clear that, he was Bill Pullman all along. It's sort of like, but it's like so confusing, because you're like, what happened to Bill Pullman's character? Right. Where is he? And so it's like two separate films, and then some bleed over happens when you see the Patricia Arquette character come into that second part. That's when you start to see a connection, and then he slowly starts to weave it back together with the first part, right? So that was the first time I saw a movie like that, where there was such a clear demarcation between two sides of something, which he clearly he did a lot more of that, as he went forward. But it was so odd and so difficult to follow that I didn't really care for it the first time. But I watched it this week, and there's nobody who can create that kind of atmosphere that Lynch can. And I think you were telling me this earlier, and it's so true. I think about maybe 40% of it is the gorgeous visuals, and 60% of it is the sound. Yeah. And it's funny, because he worked with this guy during the Eraserhead days. He worked with this guy Alan Splett, who was apparently the genius of genius in terms of sound. He was the first guy who would sort of go around and do field recordings of stuff, and they would use that. Yeah. Right. Rather than stock footage.
Because he did a lot of recording industrial noises in the area.
Yeah, exactly. And he was apparently a pretty advanced. This guy was like a real pioneer of found sound and mixing, and and that's the thing about Lynch. He's also a musician, and a songwriter, and he works almost exclusively since I think Blue Velvet with Angelo Badalamenti, right?
Incredible.
Who's incredible, and all of the scores to all of his movies are great, right?
Yeah. And the show, and Twin Peaks.
Yeah, definitely one of the most iconic. Yeah.
Music.
Yeah, I mean, I watched that. I watched Inland Empire again, which is a 3-hour one. A lot of people don't like that one.
I remember it scared the crap out of me. I saw it when it first came out. I haven't rewatched it.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty scary and creepy, but it's also, again, it's like anybody who said to me I could sit through a 3-hour movie that has absolutely no linear sense at all more than once, that's pretty amazing, right? Because I've watched it in Empire. This is like my third time watching it, right?
Right.
It's just so compelling. He's very compelling. His imagery is, I don't know, it's perfect. You know, like for example, in Inland Empire, there's a whole subsection of it that has to do with the rabbits, right?
Yeah.
This whole sitcom, scary, weird, dark sitcom about a family, but they're rabbits,
Yeah.
right? And you know
That part scared me for some reason.
it is scary because it's very stilted and still.
They're walking around,
and it's
I don't think-
awkward.
There's no dialogue.
No, there is
right?
dialogue.
Okay.
Yeah, there's dialogue because he says something like, "He'll be here soon" or something like that. And she goes, and then I can't remember what the exact dialogue is, but there's canned laughter a couple of times when they say things.
Right.
And then at the end there is some kind of indication that those rabbits are in that same hotel, you know, where they're guarding the woman in the, I don't know. It's hard to say, right? But again, it's not like you go, okay, I'm bored. Like, I don't know why we're suddenly on this. I want to follow the main character. It's like, you're not. You're like, what is this? And it's so compelling that you're watching this, rabbit family, you know. It's like, you never go like, oh, that doesn't make sense, so I'm leaving, you know. Can you imagine like any other movie where that happened? You'd be so bored.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. You'd be like, what happened? You know, this is.
I think anybody who would walk out of a David Lynch film is pretty much a complete Philistine.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
like a Trump supporter.
Exactly.
Right.
They're so MAGA.
There's no MAGA Lynch fans. So yeah, it's I don't know. What would you say? I know you're not as much into him as, and you haven't watched as much stuff recently. But what would you say his masterpiece is?
For me, his masterpiece is Mulholland Drive.
Okay,
Mulholland Drive to me was, you know, and I had seen it back when it came out in theaters, and I liked it. I rewatched it on the weekend, and I couldn't believe what I was watching. It was a movie that had, you know, this dream logic that went through that was always clear to me.
Yeah.
And yet I knew you could interpret it in different ways if you wanted to. But even these disparate moments linked together as a portrait of L.A., a city that Lynch loved.
Of the whole Hollywood dream.
The whole Hollywood dream and all of its joy and evilness and
venalness, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, even there's a strange scene near the beginning where these two guys are at a diner, and one of them says, you know, I had this terrible nightmare about this creature, behind this diner.
Oh, that's such a great scene.
And it's like, okay, well, show me.
Yeah.
And then he shows him, and then he drops dead, it seems.
Yeah. Well, because that creepy,
whatever it was,
that homeless guy who looks like a witch. Yeah.
And then that person comes back later.
It does. Yeah.
But it makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like, this is the underbelly that we're all talking about. Or when Naomi Watts comes out of the airport with the elderly couple who then can't stop smiling creepily in the cab.
Well, then they're actually like slithering towards her.
Later,
Yeah.
And you realize that in some weird way, perhaps they brought Betty into a world that they knew would destroy her.
Yeah, maybe. I mean,
but who knows?
Those old people are really
scary.
Well, like they're creepy because it's like that. It's that dream that turns into a complete nightmare.
Yeah.
So every aspect of the dream, like the nice old couple that she's traveling with, and they're like, "Oh, good luck, Betty dear," you know, whatever.
Yeah.
You know, at the end, they become actually these monstrous figures who lead her to commit suicide, right? So, or to what do they say? What do the kids say now? To off themselves? No, to unalive yourself.
Really? I've never heard that.
That's the TikTok phrase.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'm gonna say I 100% agree with you.
Yeah.
I think Mulholland Drive is a complete masterpiece.
And then
right?
you just like music, like perform, like Naomi Watts' performance.
Naomi Watts' performance,
and that was very reflective of her life. Like she was at the time trying so hard to make it in Hollywood.
Apparently, she was ready to quit. Yeah,
yeah, she was ready to quit. I mean, and
yeah, she was. I read that too. Like she was sort of like.
And all Lynch did to audition her was meet her. And then
Yeah.
said, okay, you're hired.
Yeah.
After a conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I heard a similar story from Justin Theroux, who's in Mulholland Drive, and he said basically like he got a call from somebody saying, are you interested in this? He's like, yeah, okay, and then he said, okay, can you be here tomorrow at this time? And then he's like, okay, am I in or not? I don't know. Like, so he does have that way of working, and apparently like he would play the music on set too.
Yeah. Yeah, and and Mulholland Drive also keeps harking back to old Hollywood too.
It does.
You've got Ann Miller, who's wonderful when back
as Coco.
Yeah, as Coco. Yeah, but I mean, if you ever seen her in the old MGM musicals, I mean, she's terrific.
Yeah.
And the Laura Herring character, I kept thinking about Kim Novak in Vertigo.
Yeah, that's
had
true.
That kind of like blank beauty.
It does have
alluring.
It has a lot of vertigo in it. Yeah,
in Mulholland Drive.
Yeah, it does. Because it's all about that second person who dresses up. There's that scene where she puts the blonde wig on for the first time, and they're looking in the mirror together. That's very persona, and I think it is his version because every filmmaker has a persona, right? So I think that's definitely his persona. But I mean, it's just so. Like after seeing it so many times and now reading so much, because I'm also one of those guys who can like listen to podcasts and really dive deep into Lynch lore, right? Not so much as Umer, but my brother, he's like way into this stuff, but but yeah, you can get into it. And so when I watch it, when I watched it recently, again, I didn't find it nearly as confusing as I did the first few times I saw it. And I think there's partly you get used to his rhythms the more you kind of stick with his I think it's a really good idea to watch like 2 or 3 movies in a week of Lynch rather than like switch to something else, because you need to get into his rhythm.
Don't watch Gladiator 2 and then watch Mulholland Drive.
Except, I think you picked exactly the wrong. I think that's exactly the one that goes with all of with Lynch.
The sharks.
Yeah. Apparently there are sharks. Yeah.
But the other, I'd say the other masterpiece for me is the first season of Twin Peaks. And that too, to me, harkens back to like a Douglas Sirk type of melodrama.
There's definitely some of that Douglas Sirk stuff.
Heightened drama between, I wasn't expecting so much. He's having an affair with her, and she's plotting. Yeah,
small town intrigue.
All these intrigue and everything.
Yeah.
But it all makes sense.
Right.
In the context of this town, much like Blue Velvet,
right?
The city where something horrible is happening, and everybody has kind of an inkling that it's there,
right?
But it takes Special Agent Dale Cooper to come in, and with his gee whiz charm, uncover everything.
Well, okay, so I'm gonna disagree with you there, only to say what I said earlier. I would say the other masterpiece is season 3 of Twin Peaks,
which I haven't seen yet,
especially episode 8. I think episode 8 is one of the best things I've ever seen ever. Film, TV, doesn't matter. Like I've watched that separate episode a number of times. I can't wait. It's beautiful and frightening in ways that are Lynchian, and as well just like how the fuck what are you doing, right? And Cooper, what happens to Cooper in 3 is that there are 3 Coopers, right? So it's like you have the regular Cooper who you barely see, and then you have that evil Cooper. What's his name? Oh, I can't remember evil Cooper's name. And then you have Dougie, right? Dougie is this third Cooper, kind of slightly autistic kind of character that the first time I watched it, I was really annoyed by Dougie, and then I watched it again. And of course, I watched the whole episodes again, and it's just a fascinating character, right? So anyway, when you get to 3, we'll talk, right? Yeah.
We'll talk. It's interesting how, I mean, I don't hear a lot of people talking about Wild at Heart a lot, but that's the one that won him the Palme d'Or at Cannes.
Yeah.
And at the time was pretty divisive. I think a lot.
I remember people booed when he won at Cannes. Yeah. Because I think, again, I haven't seen it for a long time, so I'd like to watch it again before I make this statement. But I think it's one of his weaker films. But again, I'd have to watch it again. But I even saying it's one of his weaker films, like it's still going to be like a great film, right? It's still going to be so weird and so amazing, right? Yeah, and also, look, I'm wearing my David Lynch shirt.
Oh my god! Oh wow!
Yeah,
amazing.
Yeah, I'll take a picture and put it on Facebook. Well, I mean, I don't know what else there is to say except that this one hit me hard.
Yeah.
But I think weirdly, like I'm just finishing up a script that I've been working on for a long time. Hopefully, we'll go into production. And I have to say, like, thinking about Lynch is very helpful to me, right? Just because, there's look at the world we live in. How many people can you point to who serve as a mentor or a kind of guide for you, right? In all aspects of your life, and
he was a very complete person.
He was very, very complete and very, like, I just talk for myself, but I get I spent my whole life, being too worried about sticking out, being, too weird or too, being too myself or whatever. This is a guy just didn't care about that. I mean, you got to remember, if you look at pictures from Lynch in the early 70s when he was making those first films, this was a time of people with long hair, big mustaches, heavy metal look, hippie, dirty, bare feet, the whole thing. He was always the guy with the buttoned up shirt, and very, square looking, as they would say, right? Mm-hmm. And he didn't care. And he had no peer pressure, like nothing could sway him from his desire for what he wanted, right? And that's a kind of fortitude I think we don't really understand. And he liked what he liked,
and that was it.
And
I like Bob's Burgers, I'll just eat there every day.
Exactly. Or like, I'm going to make this movie where he goes to dinner, with the family, and the mom starts like having an orgasm when the chicken starts moving its legs and some brown goo comes out of its butt.
Yeah.
Like.
And everyone goes, okay.
Okay, I guess let's take 2. All right.
Yeah.
I'm losing my voice. I don't have anything else to say except farewell to David Lynch.
Yep. And great opportunity to revisit a lot of his stuff, which I'm doing right now.
Me too. So keep going. Keep watching.
And I'll see you out there in the dark.
That sounds a little creepy.